Riley. I'm your host today for this half hour with Coda. Please join me in welcoming today's guest. She is the writer and director of the film, which has earned her a WGA nomination and an Academy Award nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay. Please welcome Siân Heder. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
It's always good to see you, and congratulations on the success of the film. I'm pretty sure everyone has seen it by now, but if anyone hasn't, how do you sort of describe the film? I guess the 20-second elevator pitch, because I don't think this movie lends itself well to like just a simple log line. But
it really doesn't. I mean, when I was trying to get the movie made and I was like, it's a deaf fishing musical. Like, it's totally fine. You've seen nothing like it ever before. I mean, I usually say it's about a young hearing woman in a deaf family, and she's the only hearing person in her family. And they're kind of a hardscrabble fishing clan in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And it's about this young woman finding herself torn between her desire to pursue her dreams of singing and the responsibility that she feels towards her family. And it's funny and sad, which I think is important to say, because I think so many people come out of this movie and tell me that they cry or post that they cry. And I'm like, but you will also laugh. There's a lot of comedy in this family, and it's sort of messy and dysfunctional in the way that most families are.
Well, actually, let's take a look at the trailer right now.
Sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before.
You're the girl with the deaf family?
Yeah. I just want to tell you right now.
And you sing. Interesting.
Something's got a hold on me here.
What are you doing next year?
Working with my family.
Let me tell you now, I've got a feeling, I feel so strange. Everything about me seems to have changed.
I've been coaching for Berklee College of Music. I can help you get a scholarship.
I won't let go. I said,
I want to do this.
There are plenty of pretty voices with nothing to say. Do you have something to say?
You will be required to have a hearing individual on board at all times.
Stay with you for the rest of my life. I've never done anything without my family before.
all that I need to get by.
Okay, I kind of wish I hadn't watched that, because now I'm feeling very emotional.
I do too when I watch it. And I think also because the time of shooting that movie was like one of the best times of my life. Like, so when I watch it, you sort of like have all the memories of like being in the place and capturing this scene, but also just being in that town together and making the movie. It's like a document of a really magical time.
I mean, speaking of that town, I know this film is based on a French film, but you made the choice to set it in a Massachusetts fishing village, which I believe is similar to where you grew up. Was your family sort of like the Rossies?
No, I mean, my family is like the Rossies in that my parents are totally out of line and way too open about their sex lives, and like, probably have a lot of qualities that are similar to the Rossies. But I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it's about 50 minutes away from Gloucester. But we had a lot of family friends that lived up in Gloucester. So we were not the people that had the summer house up there, but we had like friends who had places up there, and we would go and hang out all, for a large part of the summer. So the place was just so, it's a place from my childhood, and it has all this, nostalgia for me. And a lot of the locations in the movie, like the quarries that they jump off in the movie, that's Ruby's kind of secret quarry that she visits, that she takes Miles to, and they go quarry jumping. Those same quarries, like I used to break in there when I was 16 years old with a group of friends, and we would go cliff jumping off those quarries. And so as I was writing, it was kind of like getting to write very specifically for locations that held a lot of meaning for me. My mom actually reminded me recently that the very first like filmmaking class I ever took, I think it was like a video class that I took when I was maybe 13 or 14. And I made a music video to Jump Around House of Pain of my friends jumping off those quarries, and like edited it to House of Pain, like, which is probably horrible, but it's hilarious that it was like the same location. And, it was kind of the first thing that inspired me to make something visual on film.
I would ask you to put that on the DVD, but I think the DVD is already out. So I guess that doesn't make much sense.
I mean, there's so many things. There's so many stories around this. There's so many deleted scenes that I'm like, these need to go out in the world. I feel like at some point we have to figure out a way to release them.
How much did you relate to Ruby's character and feeling like an outsider? Either specifically in that town or just in life. You're a woman in a very competitive business that hasn't always been kind to the gender. I think things are improving, but can always be better. Or I just think everyone at some point feels like an outsider.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I really related to in Ruby's character, I think a couple of things. One is I'm a child of immigrants. So both my parents, growing up, I think I felt like an American kid, and that they didn't fully understand me. And there wasn't the language barrier. They both spoke English. And I've heard from a lot of children of immigrants after watching Coda that they really connect and relate to the translation aspect, like when you're the interpreter for your family. And I've had many people come up to me after screenings and say, oh my God, I just saw my story on screen. So it wasn't that for me, but it was definitely a feeling that we were different, that my parents were not like my friends' parents. And we were sort of had different rituals in my house than other people did. And so I think that aspect of it. And also I think because, my dad was a refugee, and he had a kind of intense focus on family that we were raised with. Like family was everything. And I joke that if it had been up to my dad, like he would have had us all in the same room at all times and like never leaving. Like he's like, we must all be together. And in a way, it created a kind of lovely, tight-knit, very messy and slightly enmeshed family dynamic, where I think so much of who I was felt wrapped up in who my parents were and who I was within my family. And it was very hard for me to individuate and kind of go like, who am I away from them, or who am I outside of who they are? And it was different because, my parents are both artists. I grew up, my mom's a public artist, and my dad started out as an architect, but then started doing public art with her when I was in high school. And so there was really a feeling in my family, like, you're an artist. What kind of artist are you? Or what's the outlet for your art? So there was never that friction of them kind of not understanding what I wanted to do. But what I felt was it was hard for me to kind of find my own identity or my own voice, or what was going to be my path out in the world that actually had maybe nothing to do with them. And it's interesting because I feel like when I was writing, I definitely channeled Ruby. Like I understood that really tenuous time when you're 17 and you're leaving home, or you're considering leaving home, and how painful that separation can be. And the stakes of the movie are actually it's just a girl going to college. But in terms of the emotional stakes, that pulling apart of family is very high stakes when you're at that age. And it's very high stakes for the parents on the other side of it. And I think now that I'm a parent, I really understand the Frank and Jackie side of it too, of how, painful it is, I think, to imagine that there's ever going to be something about your kid that you cannot connect to or relate to. And also that they're going to leave you, like they're going to grow up and they're going to go out. And that's part of the process, is that separation. But it's impossible to think about emotionally when you're inside of it. When you are entangled, the untangling of dynamics can be very fraught and very painful, and a process for everyone. And so in a way, it was like writing a coming of age for every member of the family. It wasn't just Ruby coming of age. It was how Jackie comes of age in the movie, how Leo comes of age, like what is this transformation and this upheaval that has to occur for everyone in this family to be healthier.
May I ask where your parents are from, and what do they think of the movie?
Yeah, I mean, my dad is from Hungary, and he, escaped during the Hungarian Revolution and came here as a refugee. They have very different immigrant stories. My mom she's from Wales, and she came here to go to art school because she felt that she couldn't be herself in Wales, and there was no room to be a woman and an artist and find her own voice. So they met here. They had an appreciation for this country and what it offered them. But also a real pride in like doing things differently. And sometimes it worked to my advantage. Like when I threw parties when I was 16 and convinced my mom that the drinking age was not 21 because she somehow didn't know that. But, I think my parents are very moved by the movie. I sat next to my dad during a screening in Gloucester, and we were all in masks, and I could just hear him like sniffing in his mask and crying. They're actually in the concert scene.
That's right.
They are like the second, it cuts to like, I think a woman first, and they're like the couple that you see who are watching. And it was kind of meta to put them in that scene, just because there was something emotional about, having a scene about Ruby's parents watching her on stage, and then putting my own parents in that scene, and having them as a part of this whole movie making process. Of course, my dad wouldn't stop looking directly into camera. And I'm in front of like 300 extras, and I just keep marching over and being like, Dad, like, stop, you're looking directly into camera. And he's like, no, I'm not. And my mom's like, yes, he is. I saw him. Like, they're completely in this whole thing. But I'm so happy that they're there, because it's just my own little secret that they're there watching as well, because I think they have been so supportive of my journey as an artist and so invested in who I am and the way that I tell stories. And, the way that they approach public art pieces is to go and like explore a space and understand the history and the story behind that place, and then create a piece of work that's about the place and about the people in the place. And it's a very organic way to think about story and creating work. And I think I inherited that from my mom, definitely, and watching her process and the way she thinks about art and storytelling.
In addition to your parents, you have this amazing cast in this film. I should say this SAG Ensemble award-winning cast.
Yes, yes.
One of my favorite performances comes from Eugenio Derbez as the music teacher, Mr. V. And actually, let's take a look at a clip from one of his scenes.
You're the girl with the deaf family? Everyone but you?
Yeah.
And you sing. Interesting. Are you any good?
I don't know.
Why did you run out of my class?
I got scared.
Of what? Other kids?
Maybe. Or maybe finding out that I'm bad.
Do you know what Bowie said about Bob Dylan? A voice like sand and glue. There are plenty of pretty voices with nothing to say. Do you have something to say?
I think so.
Good. Then I'll see you in class, Bob.
I love him so much in this movie. And I'm curious, as the daughter of teachers, I know how important teachers are. Is Mr. V based on anyone you know, a teacher or maybe even a mentor who inspired you?
Yes, Mr. V is a combination mainly of two teachers. I had two teachers in high school. One was my drama teacher, Jerry Specca, who, what's funny about Jerry is that he was also Matt Damon and Ben Affleck and Casey Affleck, their drama teacher. Like he was, you know, we went to public school. I went to the same school as those guys. They were ahead of me. I was in school with Casey. He was like a junior when I was a freshman. But Jerry was like this guru in the drama department. Like he was this amazing guy who was this total force of nature. And I recently met Matt Damon and I was like, I'm Sean. I grew up in Cambridge. Jerry Specca was my teacher. You know, the moment I said Jerry Specca, he was like, oh my God, there was no condescension in his expectations of us, which when you're 13, 14, or however old you are, to be treated like you actually have something to offer as an artist in the world. And he would do these amazing productions where we would like write our own plays and he would have us like improvise based on an idea. And we would sort of have this process of writing these pieces together. So it was also just an exploration for me as like how you tell stories and how you do that. And so Jerry was a big influence. And then I sort of mashed him up with Donald Burrows, who was my English teacher. And Donald is sort of similar in the sense to Eugenio in the film. He was this, you know, fabulous, stylish dresser. He would kind of come to school in like purple leather pants and like a fabulous scarf. The smartest and most intimidating person I've ever met in my life. I think the first class I took with him was Black literature, and he introduced me to like Ralph Ellison and Zora Neale Hurston and Toni Morrison. And it was just this massive kind of English education, but social justice education too. And he was just that teacher you were dying to please and never quite felt that you could. But it was also, again, because he expected a lot of us and me in particular. And I remember he was really the first person to tell me that I was a writer, and to read, so, you know, and like pull me aside and go like, you're really good at this. And of course, if he gave you a compliment, you were just like, oh my God, thank God for Donald giving me any, you know, little tiny nugget of approval, because I think I admired him so much that I wanted, and his intellect and his wit and all of that. And they were both very funny people, Jerry and Donald. So I feel like I mashed them up in my mind to sort of create Mr. V. And then weirdly, I reached out to Donald when I was writing, and I hadn't talked to him since high school, but I just had these vivid memories of him. And I was writing the script and I reached out and said, you know, I just want to talk to you because you were a huge influence on my life. And I'm writing about you now kind of in this script through this teacher character. And he actually had spent a lot of time in Gloucester, Mass. And I didn't know that. And he kind of ended up sharing all these stories with me of being a Black gay man in Gloucester, Massachusetts, hanging out in that community and what it was like to be a brown guy in that world. And also just kind of started framing for me that this teacher character could also be an outsider, that he was kind of out of place within this community. And that was a point of connection with Ruby. And I connected with Donald through that time, and then didn't talk to him kind of, you know, I talked to him while I was writing. I didn't know if he saw the movie. And we were walking into a Q&A in the fall in New York for the film. And I found out he died. Oh. And I was a mess. Like I was like 15 minutes before we were going to walk out on stage. And I just got a note that he'd passed away. And I was like, the way that my emotional reaction was like, and having not seen him in years, but he was one of those people that was like a force in your life that started you on your path. And so, yes, he passed, and I don't know if he saw the film, but I know that he saw an interview where I was talking about him, and his friend shared with me at his memorial that he had seen this interview where I was describing what he meant to me. So I'm happy that he saw that before he passed. And Jerry's still out there, and I think that Jerry Specca and like needs to have a tribute where it's like Matt Damon and Ben and like Casey and me, and we all like honor him because he started so many artists off in this business.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
You made a point of casting deaf actors as the Rossi family and keeping this movie as authentic as possible. I'm curious, who was the first person you sort of met with from the deaf community, and what was it like immersing yourself in that culture for the film?
Well, it was interesting because I was an outsider, and it was also like, you sort of feel strange. It's like, okay, I got to make some deaf friends. Like, how do I go about doing that? And I started reaching out to people. I started reaching out to Codas first. That was almost easier because I think there was a girl I'd gone to high school with, and I knew that her parents were deaf. And so I kind of tracked her down on Facebook and was finding some Codas to talk to. And it was like spreading the word that I was doing this project and trying to connect that way. And then Elliot Page, who was in my first movie, Tallulah, connected me with Hillary Back, who was his friend, and they had done a movie together. And Hillary is a deaf actress as well, and she's wonderful. And it was sort of like, can I take you to coffee? And, I also wanted to start studying sign. This was before I even started writing the script. So it was really important to me that I start learning the language, and also that I just start involving myself in the community. So Hillary and I went to coffee, and which was interesting because I didn't sign at the time, but she lip reads really well. And we sort of like muddled through, and I said, could you maybe start to teach me sign? And she was like, well, I'm not really a sign teacher. And I was like, but I just would love to hang out. And so we started making these coffee dates where we would go to coffee, and she started teaching me to sign. And then she started introducing me around to other people. And it was through Hillary that I found my ASL master, Alexandria Wales, and Ann Tomasetti came on after that. I also started going to Deaf West Productions because they're an amazing theater company in LA. And I just knew that would be a way to tap into the theater community here and start to meet people. And I was like such a nerd. I would like go, and then I would hang out afterwards and introduce myself to the whole cast. And I met DJ Kurz that way, who is the artistic director of Deaf West. And he was an amazing connection for me because once I befriended DJ, he started kind of going, this is the lay of the land. This is who's out there in terms of deaf actors, but also these are people that you should talk to. And then Shoshana Stern, who is another actress who had a show called This Close on the Sundance Channel. I really wanted to visit a set where they were working with deaf and hearing actors and figure out how they were doing that. And so I had reached out, my friend Andrew On was directing on that show. And so this was a little later in the process. I started going, I'd love to come to your set and just observe, and like, how many interpreters do you have, and where do they need to be, and how do we do this? So it was really, I'm pretty brave about like cold calling people or walking up to people shamelessly and saying, hey, can I take you to coffee, and can we chat about this thing? But what was amazing is to kind of, as I started learning, it's like the way I wanted to tell this story really started to change. I mean, I think, and it wasn't about the authentic casting, actually, even though that's sort of all the focus. That was like a no-brainer to me, that from the moment I wanted to do the movie, there was never a question for me that I wanted to use deaf actors in those roles. For me, it was like, how much ASL can we have in the movie? Like, how can this not be limited, but be kind of the language of the movie? And is there a way that I write half the dialogue in ASL and know that this is all going to be silent and a purely visual language? And that started to be really exciting to me. And then as I started studying the language and learning more about the language, it really started to affect the way I was writing the script.
Oh, wow.
Because the way concepts are communicated in ASL, the way humor is communicated is totally different. And so in a way, my writing style had to find an interesting marriage with the language, because I think I recently found a scene that I'd written with Frank, like a very early draft of like a Frank Rossi scene. And he was so talky, it was just like these long, like, cause I think I knew those Gloucester fishermen really well. And those guys will like talk your ear off. And I think my first stab at Frank was probably that he was just this like, everything was a story and everything was, that kind of dirty humor, but in a very chatty way. But then I think as I started to understand the language more and the way that things are communicated through the language, then I was like rewriting scenes and taking that in as I was exploring, how these characters should be communicating and expressing themselves with each other.
There's so much out there to watch this season, and I feel like everyone has seen Coda, or it was interesting. I started hearing from a lot of people in January and February who were catching it. But is there one thing that comes to mind that you would want to tell someone to entice them to watch the movie, or maybe even watch it a second time?
I think that what I love about the film is there's the subtitles, which is what, the English version of the story. What is happening in the ASL and what particularly Troy Kotzer is doing on screen is so funny and nuanced and almost separate from what you're reading in the subtitles. And I think on multiple viewings, you start to have this other experience of the humor in the movie, of the expressiveness of ASL in a way, like once you know the story, you can sort of go back in and really be watching for the kind of amazing creativity that's happening within those performances. And I don't know, I think it's what I would tell people is that there's been so much talk about representation and so much talk about what this is doing for the deaf community. And it's hugely important. But I think the thing people are surprised by when they watch the film is how universal the story is and how everybody sees themselves in this movie. And that is the thing that I've heard the most is, oh my God, that's just like my thing with my dad, or my brother and I have that same kind of weird tension where he feels ignored and I feel. So it's, in a way, I think the specificity of the culture is incredibly interesting, I think, for people who have not experienced that. But also, this is just a family, and it's a messy, crazy, funny, flawed family, just like, we all probably have. And I think I would just encourage people to watch it for that reason. I think we're in a moment in a pandemic where everybody has kind of understood the important nature of family, and what that means, and where it should live in the priorities of our lives. And I think the movie kind of speaks to that.
Absolutely. And I want to thank our friends at Apple and thank Sean for joining us today. And thank you to everyone watching. Thank you for joining us for this half hour with.
And thank you, Jenelle. This was fun.